And as the first, Amy Silver, who's the executive director of the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. And before joining the Maryland Department of Public Safety, he served 30 years as a law enforcement officer in the Department of Defense. And he held a variety of positions in patrol operations, training, recruitment, and policy development. And I think this is going to help. He's in charge to train our law enforcement officers. So I'd like to introduce Wayne Silver.
Thank you. Actually, do I have to use the microphone?
No, you don't.
Okay. Oh, that's nice. Point. I'll tell you, I put a couple notes down before I would be happy to take any questions you have. The first thing I have to say is thanks for having me, and thanks for understanding and appreciating just how serious this topic is. But with that, I also have to say that I am here in an unequal capacity. So I'm not representing the commission at this time. So whatever I say is me, not the commission. Let me give you a little history, if you don't mind. That's what happens when you're a history major. When I was in my police academy 34 years ago, okay. What we learned about handling people with mental crisis wasn't helpful at all. What we learned was how to identify if a person was schizophrenic or bipolar, and what they really didn't do is tell what we should do when we got there. You know, so you had a bunch of cops all over the country running around pretending they were doctors. But that's changed, and that's changed for the better. What we do now is, and not just recently, this has been going on for at least 10, 15 years, is we focus on people in crisis, period, full stop. Because as you're probably aware of, because it hits every family everywhere, a person can be in crisis for a variety of reasons. It may be that they had psychological issues. It may be that they have physiological issues. Also, they may also be in a situation where they're just in crisis because what is occurring in their life at that moment in time. And what we have found, especially when it comes to training enforcement officers now, is that if we focus on dealing with the crisis and not just handling a call, it will give benefits beyond the way we used to do it. And what I mean by that is this. Why do people call officers? Because they want them to fix things. Okay. So oftentimes the mindset was, and frankly, I've been guilty of this a few times myself, where I'm going to go there, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to go on to my next call as quick as I can. Well, that doesn't really give you a lot of time to deal with people in crisis, but things have changed. Okay, what departments are finding now is that spend the time to fix the problem there, and then instead of just running off the next call. Because when we did it the old way, what would happen? We'd be going back there. Okay, so that's kind of gone the way of the dinosaur. So what we do now is we confront it through a variety of different things, to include looking for options. You know, the only option when you deal with a person in crisis should not be arrest. Okay, it should be getting them the assistance they need, getting them the care they need, and in some cases, ladies and gentlemen, just letting them talk. Okay, just letting them talk. All right, so it's all about things there. What you also find is that a lot of departments now have what are called crisis intervention teams. Okay, there are specialized trained officers who get at least 40 hours of additional training in it. It's a nationwide program, and when they confront someone with a crisis, this person comes because they know how to handle it. Additional training to do it. About 60% of the departments nationwide now have crisis intervention. All right, but here's the big thing that's made a difference. Have you heard of de-escalation? Okay, de-escalation works. Okay, And one of the biggest things you need in order to de-escalate a situation is discretionary time. You have to build discretionary time. And when you build that discretionary time, you're building options for people. And when I say options, just options for the person in crisis, but also options for the law enforcement officer, options for the community, and it works. It works. Now, I will tell you this. We talk a lot now about de-escalation. De-escalation isn't anything new. It isn't. Parts of de-escalation were taught to me, 34 years ago, but it was never really put together as a program where it was put with communication skills, with officer safety, with command presence, with incident command, and all these things figure into de-escalation. And one of the things that we found as we trained this is that a lot of this deals now with protecting the officers as well. Because if I can at that time, that discretionary time, and give options, there's less chance that this will be physical. And if there's less chance of this from physical, there's less chance of anybody. Okay, and I'll tell you, I've never met a police officer who said, I can't wait to roll on the ground today and tear up my uniform. Okay, uniforms are hard to replace. But it really, really does work. And what's more importantly is that it's gotten buy-in from police departments, but it's also gotten buy-in from officers because we're seeing the benefits. And we see it in the statistics. 10 years ago, the average spent on a person in crisis call was 8 minutes. You get there, you figure out what's going on, you do something. Now it's 27 to 30 minutes. That may not seem like a lot, but it is. That can be the difference between a person crisis having time to consider additional options that are available to them, additional resources for the police officer to arrive, and different outcomes to occur. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have on this story.
Do we think we need the microphone? I think it's small. Yeah. Just stand, if you're gonna ask a question, please stand up and identify yourself.
Okay, Linda Cohn, League of Montgomery County, and Maryland. Can you talk more about de-escalation? That might be something that I pull in the lead, but what is, talk more about what is it and what do you do when you say de-escalate?
Okay, we'll actually teach a 2-hour class on de-escalation. Okay. De-escalation is a process of, as I kind of say, for options. In other words, what it is that you, when time, circumstances, and safety permit, that you don't just rush to do something. Okay, it's kind of the old saying, if the tree falls in the woods, in the forest doesn't make a sound. Okay, whereas when officers now get there, instead of going that problem-solving mode immediately, where they feel they have to go in, put hands on, and serve it, they use additional resources. The biggest resource they use is communication. Okay, all police academies now, whether they're in Maryland or wherever in the country, they teach a substantial block of instruction, in some cases up to 80 hours of an in communication skills. The academies I'm familiar with, they started on day 3 with practical exercises, because that's a big part of it. It's a situational based, putting officers in positions where they can see there's other techniques you can use other than just going physical at that time. De-escalation is also using additional police resources, creating that discretionary time, drawing things out when you can to allow additional resources. In some cases, it may be non-lethal weapons, okay? But in other cases, it may be a crisis intervention team who's going to come, or maybe a hostage negotiator who's going to talk to a person in crisis. Or it may be other community resources that are going to come, and they're going to not necessarily take over for the police officer, but they're going to be there assisting the officer in what to say, what not to say, and what to do at that moment in time. And also, if possible, encourage the person to use their resources. Because the top 2 reasons why police officers respond to people in crisis is either a suicide threat or some type of disturbance. Okay, usually it's not a crime necessarily, And very seldom, more likely than not, they do not become violent. But it's just getting that person to a better place. And that's what de-escalation does. It gives more options to the police officer, more options to the person. When I say more options, that's because of that discretionary time. Because what that discretionary time does is basically, if a person's on an emotional level, just give them a chance to think maybe there's another way out of this than where they were taking. And they can talk them through it and maybe find them a better road to getting help. So that's like this de-escalation in 200. Yeah.
Sherry Zachary, neighborhood members, Fairfax area. Can you say, or do you know how many departments in Maryland have the crisis intervention, and have y'all been able to assess how well it works?
I can't say specifically, there's 157 police departments in Maryland. But I do know nationally, 60% of departments have CIPD. Usually they're found in metropolitan areas, but you do see some smaller departments where they and the entire department is CIPD training. A lot of it's done through grants, 40 hours justice program for it. So as far as how successful it is, most of that would just be anecdotal. But the people who have been through training and have implemented it, they've seen results, less arrests for officer injuries. So anecdotally, we see that it works, but there really hasn't enough study long enough to say this is where it's going.
Hi, Gretchen Blankenship, Montgomery County, Maryland. Do you and other police officers feel that this is actually your job? Not feel that healthcare professionals would be more suited for this kind of prevention? And I know you, as police officers, don't have a say, but it seems some of the misfortunate events that have had would have been better handled by not a police officer.
Well, yes and no, because I guarantee you, an officer on a scene, a person in crisis, would rather have a psychiatrist or a psychologist handling it next to them. But there's also a practical aspect to this. Police officers know they're called to this, and when they know they're going to get called to, they expect to handle it, and they understand that the community expects them to handle it. When the crisis intervention training really took off in the de-escalation, frankly, we didn't know how it would be accepted by police officers, and they've embraced it. And the reason they've embraced it, in those cases, there's always one or two, but they've embraced it is because they see them as well. Because if they can solve it with it becoming physical, that's a win-win for everybody. So yeah, there's a little bit of things about we're not really trained to do this. More so back when I said, they used to say, okay, this is a paranoid schizophrenic, because then you did have police officers. They're saying, I'm not a psychiatrist, but they're treating me like one. So it's a little bit. I think they see the role change a little bit. It also helps in jurisdictions or areas that have that support. And usually you see that in metropolitan areas where they know that there's a team that they can call. There's additional county or city resources that can be pulled in. So that in cases, the police officer feels like they're just part of the plan, the overall plan. They may be the initial part, but there's another part to it. It's not just them and the person.
Okay, thank you for your response to that. I have a follow-up question. My name is Gail Clark Dixon. I'm with Burgess County, lead. So let's talk about the collaboration between mental health professionals and law enforcement. Because when I think about a crisis team, it seems like it would be important for a mental health professional to be a part of it. So what does collaboration look like?
Collaboration can take a couple of different forms. Obviously, collaboration in some jurisdictions which have a lot more resources, it can be the mental health professional coming to the scene and assisting. In some areas, maybe that they communicate with the officer over the phone, saying, "Hey, here's what you have. Let's do this. Let's try and get them into this type of subject, something other than having to do an emergency petition and handle it. But in other cases, they assist in the training of the officers, in the CIT training. They're an integral part of it. I don't, in our academy, mental health professionals come in and they teach officers, this is how you talk to people in crisis. They run a lot of the programs. So that what the officer is learning mirrors what the healthcare professional will do as well. So it can take a lot of different levels. A lot of it is based on resources that jurisdiction has, or the community has.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jackie Coolidge from Montgomery County. So, I believe you when you say that things are, getting in terms of training and so on. On the other hand, the news that we've been getting, there seems to be a countervailing problem that's been getting worse. And so we've seen this, New York just a couple days ago, Virginia was a couple of weeks or months ago, of these really mental health crises spiraling out of control and horrific outcomes. And in particular, with more and more guns out there, I can understand police having a legitimate fear. On the other hand, how do we overcome? I'm afraid that the force worsening the fears is overwhelming what you're talking about, which is okay, we're getting better training.
I see it's slightly different, and only from perspective of the new training importance, and it's I understand how it looks like it's going up, but I can only look at doing how officers responded 15-20 years ago and how they respond. And in some cases, it comes back to the resources that the department has, how big the department is, where the department's resources are, all those type of things. So what we'll also find, like anything, most of this is being embraced in academies. Okay, and we're building what we call files with these, and those officers are hitting the streets, and they're doing it the new way. Now, I'm not saying we haven't went back and trained the seasoned officers, okay? But it's hard because if you've been doing something one way forever, it takes a while to get in a new mindset. And part of that is when you start seeing that it's working over time. So I really do think it's getting better. Do we still have some work to do? Of course. But it is getting better.
Geraldine Whitley from ECU. I vote 100% of the training for these officers when they are confronted with a situation, real life situation. It's having mental people that they are confronting have more powerful weapons than the police officers have themselves. But my question is, at what point and what level can we expect to see a police officer arriving on the scene and analyzing the situation? The mental person without a gun and get a shot or killed, whatever, and as opposed to the mental with a gun, and so he's also getting killed himself. What level can we expect to see a police officer arriving on the scene and based on the backup people able to analyze the situation? And I realize that life is on the line, and I realize it's very threatening, but is there a point where somebody can just back away and say, send back, not another police officer necessarily, but the person that you mentioned who are in various levels of psychiatry and are able to help with this particular situation? And I really realize that with the police officer wife being on the line when they answer the call, I sympathize with them, but I do wish that there would be some kind of ways that they could probably stop the killing. Especially when they get the backup to analyze the situation.
Well, a lot of the ability to de-escalate, which is where a lot of this comes from with a person in crisis. You don't have that discretionary time, and that's kind of what you're talking about there. Is if you don't have discretionary time, it's very hard to de-escalate anything. And then you just have, if you can do it, time, safety permits, because like you said, yeah, back up, but you can't back up to the point where you're putting the community in harm's way. The balancing act here going on. So I can't really give when it all built on that discretionary time. Do you have the time available? You have the resources available too, because that's the other side. Some jurisdictions don't have a lot of resources available, or the resources will take forever. Studies have shown that sometimes officers who live in rural areas, it could be an hour before they get that type of assistance there. Obviously, it's much shorter, but it's at least 25-30 minutes in a metropolitan area. So a lot can happen in 25-30 minutes, and you have to maintain control and safety of the scene. So you're right, you know, as we get more resources and as different things, different options become available, but if we don't have that time, it's almost impossible.
Thank you.
This does have a program. I have a friend that was psychiatrist and I'm Joyce Stars, and I'm with the DCB and I'm president of the NCA. DC does have a program in place. I have who's a part of it. I'm just asking the question. Does Maryland, Prince County have a program? And let me explain the program. They have when the police gets a call, they reach out to this contract company. At the same time, the two of them go out together. And so psychiatrist is able to take on the role of taking care of some of the mental health parts, where the police department is able to take on the role of the safety and security of the mental health. I'm asking a question, does Prince George's, Montgomery County, does any other jurisdiction have that kind of program set up? And vice versa, if they get a call, they call the police and they meet together and talk about the situation. And it's kind of like what Geraldine was hinting. There's something in place, because that way it certainly would help you guys and you guys would be helping them.
Unfortunately, I can't answer specifically. I know they have programs, but I haven't actually studied depth enough to tell you how they react. But I do know they do have programs, like most metro or big counties do, for that matter. But I would be shocked if they did. I know they have programs. I've talked to the folks about them, but the specifics I can't say they are.
Saying that discretion, how much discretionary time the officer has to and how it's in the volume of the response. What dictates how much they're going to have? Are there policies that the officer can always set?
Oh, no.
What do jurisdictions do in order to enable budget?
Well, it's not really the jurisdictions, it's what the officer needs. That's starting to determine how much discretion they have. Because if the person, for example, has a weapon and is trying to attack someone, well, you don't really have discretion. But if the person doesn't have a weapon and there's no threat to anyone else's safety, well, now you do have discretion. So it's all built on the whatever incident or the scene that the officer walks into. The officer may not even know what that is until they get there. Because a lot of times they'll call for one And they'll get there and it'll be something completely different than what they thought they were walking into. So they really don't know how much time they're gonna have until they get there. And in some cases, they may not even know what resources they need until they get there. So it's not so much up to the agency saying you have this much time, it's what does the incident allow us? How much time do you allow us to go in?
Couple of questions. One, in our DM area, there are a lot of individuals in our communities who speak English. So I'm wondering if the training includes some type of capability for the officer at the scene to be able to communicate. You said communication is important with the person involved. The other question is, you mentioned training and academy. Is that for state police, let's say of Maryland? Does it include local police departments? What kind of training, and does that filter into even smaller, local Rockville Police Department?
Oh, they do a lot, especially with the CIT training. That's pretty much a nationwide model program that it's being trained the same way across jurisdictions. Now in Sykesville, each municipal departments, it's usually small, but the state academy, there's 20 academies in the state of Maryland, and they all teaching along the same lines. Now, your part is, yes, that is taken into account, and that's trained in de-escalation. Not as if there's a language barrier, but if a person is refusing your commands or your commands, why are they ignoring your commands? Is it because they just don't want to do what you want them to do? Or is it because there's a language barrier? Is it because they don't understand what you're asking them to do because they're in crisis or in stress? Or is it that they don't have a cognitive ability to understand what you're saying at that moment in time? So that is given all that. It may be as simple as calling an interpreter, or maybe always using hand signals until someone can get there. So that is taken into it, which frankly really wasn't talked about, 20 years ago. It was, well, the person disobeyed my commands, but now a lot of times, why did they disobey your commands? And if they're disobeying your commands because there's a language barrier or for any other reason, really, what are the options available to maybe get them to understand what you want them to do, as opposed to just assuming they just don't want to do it.
Connie, in Virginia. So that means that if you're calling in an incident, what would be the useful information to say perhaps this person's Spanish, they're a 17-year-old male. How much information would the police, what would be helpful for them to respond to the question?
That would be helpful. What's mostly helpful for officers is to be objective in what information you give us, as opposed to subjective. So instead of saying, for example, that the individual is suspicious, actually identify, which that could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, right? Say specifically, what are they doing? Are they looking in windows? Okay, are they talking to themselves? Are they making whatever they may be doing? Tell specifically, objectively, this is what I see them doing as opposed to how I'm interpreting what they're doing. Because, and that gets back to a lot of times, happened to me. We have a suspicious person. Well, what makes them suspicious? So that's really helps. Whereas if you tell the officer something objective, that's fact, then they kind of get a picture of what the person is doing there, and they can already maybe start to formalize what really is or isn't occurring.
I just have one more. Correction Blankenship, Montgomery County still. Has this training enticed more people to become police officers or turned them off?
Well, I'll tell you, in Maryland, it's just by law, we have to teach it as of 2021. So we're kind of ahead of things in that. We really haven't seen a spike one way or the other, because I'll tell you, when people go to apply to be police officers, they're not looking at the curriculum of the academy. They're just looking, they want to be police officers. And in a lot of cases, they don't know what they don't know until they get there. So I don't think it's really had an impact one way or the other.
Susan Albertina. In this training program, do you also deal with emergencies that are not crisis? Say, for example, somebody's child has died out of state, and the police call the police, and they call the local police come to the house, and somebody has died. Is there consideration about the mental health condition of, say, families and special training, thinking about the sensitivities of the people who are receiving these news?
Yeah, that,
That's part of
that's not part of de-escalation.
No, I
But,
understand that.
but
No,
that's part of when we talk about crisis.
Yeah.
And a lot of academies, they actually teach a whole separate block on communications, death notifications, on how to do it, how not to do it, how to do it, how to be, show sensitivity, you know, how to read the person or accepting information. Are they in denial? What you're telling them, you know, how can you, resources are available in their community for them. You know, how much information can you give them regarding, because in some cases, you may not have a lot of information, especially if it happens out of state. Not have a lot of information on what actually occurred, but you have contacts that they can make. So it is making sure that you're notifying a person of that in a very a sensitive and compassionate way, and not just coming off as this is a, and I've got to go do it, and I'm leaving. And I'll say that is one of the hardest things. It really is.
Any more questions from anybody?
Going on?
Quick one.
Nope, we already said that.
I'm Barbara Zia from the League of Women Voters of DC. And accommodation for people in having mental health crises, detention. I see your responsibility is correctional services. You know, a lot of people who are in detention are there because they've had mental health episodes.
So the only correct connection I have with corrections is it falls under the same umbrella. So I really don't deal with correction that much. But I do know they have a whole, I'm looking at their curriculum, not as in depth as I've dealt with mine. They work on that as well, because unfortunately, being arrested can put a person in crisis. So it is a big issue on that side, but I wouldn't feel educated enough to give an answer.
Any more questions? Well, I want to thank Mr. Phil for. She's running late, traffic, traffic in Washington is just terrible, so she's running late, but she's on the mental health side, but I think you answered the questions really. And we are very grateful. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
She's a business executive, diversity training. She public speaker, she's an administrator, she is in education, she's an attorney, she's a human rights, she has human relations, social justice consultant. She's a member of the DC Bar. She has been founder, president, general counsel of her own firm. Creative and innovative resources for Kids, Inc. And she's had that business since 1989. She has provided consulting services to over 2,000 clients in 49 states and on 4 continents. She's received over 150 plaques and awards for her outstanding efforts. She is also founder of her own law firm, the Kuykendall Company, the former full-time university professor at Seton Hall University. She has been an adjunct faculty. She has been on an adjunct faculty at McLaren State University and Strayer University, and a member of the advisory board in the School of Education and Studies at Morgan State University. In 2016, received the Distinguished Alumni Award from Mount Clair State University, where she earned a master's degree in sociology, a former public school teacher and juvenile justice attorney. She holds 2 master's degrees, a doctorate in educational administration, and a law degree. A member of 4 boards of directors, she has served as chair of the director of the Family Life Center Foundation in DC for 9 years, author of 4 books, including the highly acclaimed national bestseller From Rage to Hope, Strategies for Reclaiming Black and Hispanic Students. She's a mother of 4, mentor, school and church volunteer, and the ultimate merchant of she enriches the lives of thousands. Now her bio goes long past it, but we'll be here another 3 hours. We abbreviated her bio, and I'm not gonna stand between you and her. I'll let you hear for yourself.
Woo, thank you.
Sival, let me just say how honored and deeply humbled I am to be with all of you today. And would you put your hands together with join me in giving Joyce Stark some love? And for this opportunity. I've always been a fan of the League of Women Voters, and that has only been enhanced as I have gotten older. So just let you know, I commend you for all that you do. I was asked to be here today specifically to talk about the role of mental health and look at the justice system. Now, I am not a mental health expert. I don't think mental health anywhere in that bio, but I am an attorney and I am an ordained clergy and I am an educator and have provided educational consulting services to thousands, and I'm a mother. And for that reason, mental health is of extreme importance to me, particularly relates to our young people, particularly as it relates to people of color. We all know, at least if you haven't been under a rock, that this month of May is Mental Health Awareness. Significant, because what we realize now is that the powers that be, federal government, has determined that there needs to be a focus on mental health issues. And the good news is the Department of Health and Human Services has now launched, and I counted them, there were about 38 new initiatives. I was going to tell you all about it, but I figured, no, you don't want to hear that. You're going to be here too long. That would be the 3 hours. As I looked at those initiatives, and they're all in the areas of better care, better assistance to providers of mental health assistance, better assistance to families, working with our educational system. I mean, all of these initiatives are great, but there's one glaring omission. None of the initiatives address mental health issues as they pertain to our criminal justice system. I'm going to share with you some things that you probably already know. You probably already know that the population that has the least amount of medical attention when it comes to mental health happens to be African Americans. And of those African Americans, the population, even within that group that has the least attention on mental health, are those who are under the age of 30. What that means is that whether it's because of distrust of medical institutions, that if you know anything about history, you know that reason for Black folks to be scared of medical professionals. So whether it's a distrust or simply lack of funds, or simply lack of transportation, or any other reasons, and there could be a myriad of reasons. We know that many people of color, particularly if they're Black and under 30, simply will not seek